I'm recording. No, yes. Okay. Hi, everybody. This is the, what is it? This is September 11th, 2019 SIG API Machinery meeting. We skipped the last meeting, so we've got a rather large agenda. So let's get started. I want to kick us off with a short item. If you've been here for the last few months, like 4 or 5 months or so, you may have noticed Fede here doing a lot of stuff either when I'm here or not here, like running this meeting. And I think I'd like to propose that we split the chair and TL role for this SIG. At least David Eads and I are each co-chair and co-TL, so I'm proposing that we take the my half of that and make Fede the chair, and I'll continue to be the TL. I think it's pretty traditional to give some notice when you do something like this, so I'll make a follow-up email on the list, and we'll make it official like next week or something if nobody objects. Just to briefly recap what the difference is. The chair is more about operations and processes governing the SIG, like running this meeting and or I don't know, helping connect new contributors, setting up KubeCon things, that sort of stuff. And the tech lead is more about the technical aspects of the code that the SIG owns. So like establishing new sub-projects, decommissioning existing sub-projects, resolve technical issues, decisions, etc.
Making KEP decisions, for instance.
Yeah, KEP decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I already warned David about this, so I don't think it'll surprise him. But yeah, just thought I would kick that off here, and I'll send a follow-up email. Okay. Let's go on to good news. CRDs and admission webhooks GA in 1.16. This is pretty awesome. We've been working on these for, I don't even know how long, forever.
800 years.
Yeah,
That way.
probably 800 years in this.
7 that came out?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, and even before that, there was the TPRs, which I think this is the moral successor to, if not the, they don't share much code in common. Does anybody want to say more about that? The next piece of good news, server-side apply went beta in 1.16. This is a limited beta. It's opt-in for each object, so it doesn't like. There's a bunch of stuff that we will, in the fullness of time, track for every operation, like updates for every object. And that is not on globally yet because we have to fix some performance issues. But we have a path to fixing those performance issues that we're confident in, and this will, so basically as soon as you use the server-side apply on an object, it will track it, it'll do all the stuff for that object. So it's essentially like a per object opt-in, and that'll let users tell us like, yes, this is good, no, you need to make some changes, so we can get some useful feedback and make sure that we're not developing in a vacuum. Our plan for the future is the next release will have a beta 2, and we're going to fix our serialization issues and hope to turn it on universally, and maybe we'll accept, that's accept with an E, some really high bandwidth types like pods and endpoints, leases, just so we are extra sure that we don't have any performance impact. And then when we go GA, we expect to turn it on everywhere after we demonstrate that there's not a significant performance impact. Yeah, so the connectivity service, that's with a K, went alpha. This is a egress system that replaces the SSH tunnels. which were kind of done in a rush and not great, but as evidence for how hard the problem is, it's taken several quarters to ramp up and get their replacement in. Walter's done a great job pushing those PRs through. We got sign off from networking SIG folks and me and David Eads, and so yeah, there's Walter off camera. So that's great, and we'll hope to go. Are we planning beta?
I would like to. We'll probably very soon be extending the cap to get an agreement on what beta consists of.
Yeah. So basically, this solves the problem where you have an asymmetric networking situation, and it's easier to make connections that go into the control plane network than it is for the control plane to reach out to your cluster nodes, right? Which is a pretty common situation for, depending on how you're operating, but it's certainly common for a number of cloud providers. So yeah, there was multi-company coordination on that one. CRD defaulting beta, I assume that, Stefan, you put that on there?
Yes.
Would you like to tell us about it?
Yeah, you can just define defaults now in Open API schemas, and I applied in CRDs. And it's just available in V1 CRDs.
This is letting people do one more thing that would keep them from having to write admission webhooks.
Well, admission webhooks don't even solve this because it also works on read.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not a substitute. It is different functionality, gives you additional power, and the Kube APIs relied heavily on it as we evolved them.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Let's see. We're already 10 minutes in, and we have got a lot to cover. So I'm gonna, if you have other big news, send us an email. Spam us with email. Fede, do you want to talk about
Sure.
San Diego SIG representation?
Super short. KubeCon San Diego is coming. We have at least 3 places where we officially need to be. I submitted an introduction to API Machinery. It's going to cover, high level, what we own, what we do, how do we meet, how can you help, etc. I'm doing it alone for now. If anybody is eager to help and share the stage with me, is welcome to reach out to me. And then we have a deep dive in API Machinery. We're going to have representation from different companies, which I think is super healthy. So Antoine and Stefan, they volunteered for doing this. I think we are going to cover a lot of things, but especially server-side apply and CRDs. So it's great to have you guys there. And then we've been requested to have somebody at least one person, hopefully more, to represent the SIG in the first day of Summit, the Contributor Summit. So I'm open to suggestions. I think I will try to travel there on Monday, depending on family and other things. But if somebody knows that they are going to be going to the summit, reach out to me and we can make it official.
Are we looking for someone to present there, or just be there available for meet and greet, or what's the commitment we're expecting from people? And in full disclosure, I'm not going to make it to San Diego, so.
I registered just in case. I haven't completely decided, but I think I'm going to be there. I registered for the Contributor Summit also. I think what we're looking for is meet and greets. I'm not sure. I had it felt like a bunch of different people pinging me about this.
Yes.
Perhaps that's motivating the first item here.
Let's assume I saw an email, was not directed to me, somebody forwarded me, was requesting at least only one person. I assume it's meet and greet. Yes. If that changes, I will let him know. But
yeah, maybe we can follow up on Slack or
I will
email.
follow up on that one with more information.
Figure out exactly what we need.
That's it.
Okay, cool. And then I on a whim added a section of seems like a good time to talk about our priorities now that CRD is our GA. That was a lot of people were working hard on that, so maybe we have some freed up bandwidth. And this we'll probably spend the rest of the time on this section. David, do you want to kick us off? Looks like you added some at the top.
Sure. So there are some, I'm going to say, significant road bumps as you try to make certain pieces of, say, aggregated APIs work. We've hit them and found workarounds in OpenShift, and I want to try to start bringing those up back into Cube. One of them is about delegated authentication inside of the server. I've got a bug open that describes some of the issues there. It spans both auth and API machinery, and so the auth stuff has started now. I think Jordan agrees on the way that goes, but final wiring bleeds through to API machinery, as a for instance.
Okay.
It's also notable that this also touches things that make use of delegated authentication, like metrics endpoints for the scheduler and controller manager and things like that.
It does.
Yep.
And the goal was to make them more reliable and deal with some of the issues that we found, like fighting servers and stuff doesn't update, various and sundry, but it's significant.
Yeah. I pretty strongly agree that any place we're plumbing like CAs or whatever, there has to be a provision for update, right?
Yeah.
Roll over to new server.
Especially if it's watching our API for it, it's really embarrassing that it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You should find the team responsible and tell them to make something that makes it work. I had a general question about whether there was appetite for moving the Cube API server to staging. It's logically a distinct unit. We definitely want to do things like keep our internal APIs to ourselves. It would carry some organizational benefit, although it will also make some of the ugly appear. We will notice things like, oh, that E2E test took a dependency directly on our registry. How and why did that happen?
Yeah.
When you say keep internal APIs to ourselves, how would we do that? Like move them to staging, but inside an internal package?
Move them to staging, and then once you go to staging, it becomes easier to find. Like we have tools today that are supposed to depend or prevent bad imports and bad boundaries. But if we actually moved to staging, we had direct enforcement. At least the last things I moved there. It was as simple as a go list. Do you have this there? Okay, you fail.
Sure, but that also puts types we didn't want the world depending on into a repo that we are publishing for the world to depend on, right?
Yeah, you also have to move them into an internal package to really... but I think this is an interesting item, actually.
Is there an issue open to maybe collect some discussion and?
No, this is a like. Do we have an appetite for even trying this?
Yeah, no, I think we should.
There's no intent.
Session, not
sure.
Session just yet. So I think that's fine that there's not an issue. The thing that interests me is like, I wonder, how feasible would it be to move like the API server code there while leaving the registry stuff for built-in APIs under the control of the proper place? That seems hard, right?
Yeah. So it's not magic. Staging isn't like a little magic place. But
magic is black magic.
It is more organized, I think, than what we have today. So if we were ever to want to split ourselves out, I do see this as a significant first step.
Yeah.
I'm fine if the answer here is no. I just want to know whether there's an appetite for it. And
I'm interested in it. I'm not sure if it would win a prioritization round against other things that I'd just do.
Yeah, I guess like talking to Jordan just here, he has a different vision of what he would want staging to be versus maybe what it actually is or currently is.
Yeah, I wonder if we should maybe drop by the SIG architecture working group on code organization and have a heart-to-heart over staging in that forum.
It may be worthwhile. I'm looking at it and seeing what it looks like the direction from code organization is that we want to try to separate our bits, make their dependencies clear, essentially move all the pieces to staging as a first cut separation.
Yeah.
And make the dependencies amongst them extremely explicit, and then figure out where to snip from there. And that's something I agree with, but it wouldn't require doing something like making packages suddenly internal, which I do find to be abusive.
I think that's still within the original purpose of staging, which is move everything here and then figure out how to reverse the direction. Okay.
The next thing on my list is semi-related. We had long talked about the idea of a generic client Go. So pieces of client Go that do not depend on Kate's IO API. And I still think this is really valuable for us to do. I like the generic client. I like the generic informers. I like some of the controller structure that we have that doesn't have any dependency today on Kate's IO.
Yeah, I think this would be great. This is every time we've prioritized client stuff, this has ended up on the list.
Yeah.
We've never done it. Like if you look back at our old documents, I'm pretty sure this concept is called Go base or something like that.
It is. I think it was client Go base or client Go library or something like that.
Yeah, because the idea is if you're providing an API type and you want to make a place for somebody to grab the generated clients or whatever, it doesn't gel well with the existing library that we publish, because we package all the generic stuff that you have to depend on along with all the generated stuff that you may or may not need.
Yeah. So if this idea has some traction in terms of review time, I will spend the time to go ahead and write a KEP to describe what it is that I mean. I do think that if we could find a way to make this not depend on Kate's IO API Machinery, I would be even happier. If I can find a way to have a truly separate library that could actually be controlled and work with Semver, like the Go mod stuff.
Yeah, I definitely think people would appreciate that if we could pull it off.
But I haven't. Okay, then I'll go ahead and do the background research on that and get a KEP open to sort out what is and isn't possible there.
I mean, even if it's pretty feature limited at first, because we start off not permitting that dependency, I think it might still be valuable. Right?
Yeah.
It's easier to add stuff in than it is to take stuff out. So
I agree.
As an added note, this is something that would be super useful from QBuilder land. Stefan and I have talked about it a little bit before. So
I'm having some trouble hearing. Is that Solly?
yeah, I think that's solid.
Sorry. Yeah, I was saying this would be super useful from QBuilder land. This would move us into an area that would make it a lot easier to maintain some of our dependency-related stuff. Stefan and I have talked about this a little bit before. So when you have something, or if you have something for review, definitely please do loop us in.
And taking controller runtime and tools and just check which dependencies we use from API Machinery would be worthwhile. Yeah.
Because being able to snip that one, until you can snip that one, you can't use Semver. And the Semver would be a big deal. So I'll explore it in the KEP and try to explain what our options are. If it is completely distinct, I don't think it would be developed in staging. I think it would be developed truly separate.
Yeah, okay. Let's go on because we're burning through our time here. Jordan, you want to talk about the next one?
I don't want to, but I feel like we should. This issue where a network disruption ends up leaving dead TCP connections in the Go client keep alive cache, where they sit and poison requests and let higher level HTTP requests just time out and fail and then get returned to the Keep Alive pool has showed up in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. Kubeproxy hangs, kubelets hang, they fail to heartbeat, ignition webhooks hang, like any client that uses client Go can experience this. A proposal for a really low-level TCP level fix that was really ugly at the time, used like socket file descriptor, bit twiddling, OS level stuff that was really scary and horrible. Actually might be possible to do as of Go 1.12. Go started exposing the descriptor directly to us without some of the weird copy like allocation problems. There's like 5 open issues about this. I think we should look at this because it potentially bites everyone, and it definitely bites us in some really critical places.
How related to the HTTP2 complaints is this?
It's not the same. It's not the same at all. So this is connection level where your network connection got black holed and your client is just thinks it's fine and it's not. The HTTP2 stuff is about balancing and multiplexing. So it's 2 different layers.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I wasn't aware that there'd been new issues on this TCP stuff. It seems like
they get opened against client Go and against API machinery and against like random components like kubeproxy hangs or kubelet hangs or random application hung. Like they're not concentrated in one place, which is why this hasn't bubbled up. I linked them there. It's on my list to kind of flag to bump the priority on some of these. But if anyone's interested in looking into this, definitely ping me or comment on those issues.
Yeah. Would it be appropriate for us to consider fixing this not in our code, but in upstream standard library code?
I would definitely consider that because it seems like the kind of problem that every Go client consumer is vulnerable to and doesn't realize.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on.
The next one is kind of a bucket. We can come back to it if we want. There are bugs that we have marked as critical urgent and have like pretty concerning implications and haven't gotten time or resolution on. One was with etcd and one was with the watch cache like lag stuff.
Yeah,
it really seemed like a good time to review those and say if these are really critical urgent, let's.
Yeah, I need to get Joe to look at that second one. I thought we were close to having a resolution on that, but it is still open, so I'm not sure what the status of that one is.
Joe was looking at the first one too, wasn't it? It was coming straight from etcd. I feel like I got tagged on it or something, and I was looking at it, and
yeah, okay.
Maybe. The next one, Go 1.13 is out, and we can't switch Kubernetes to it yet because all of our code generation stuff makes assumptions about Go list and vendor reflection inspection stuff that doesn't hold anymore in 1.13.
They changed Go list?
Yep.
How is this possible?
It gives you the same answer, but instead of taking like a millisecond, it takes like 30 seconds. And it turns out we call it a lot. So it'll take like an hour now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is that what the Manuras guy, that JetStat guy, is that what he hit?
I don't know what you're talking about.
There was a guy that was saying code generation was taking a long time.
No, I think I saw that. I think it was this.
He had something else with his environment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should we like be filing an issue in upstream Go? Like
it got filed. It's known and working as intended.
How can working as intended?
It's because it uses module resolution instead of Go path resolution. The performance and cache characteristics are different.
By different, you mean like thousands of times worse?
Yeah. Tim Hawken went back and forth with the Go team quite a bit on this already.
Is there a replacement that we could just use that is like Go used to be list? Because
there are, I can dig up the issues.
Okay.
There are recommendations and tools that they provided that do some of the things, and I think Tim already switched some of our build scripts to use that, but not the code generation ones.
Okay.
Anyway, I linked to the kind of umbrella issue. If you find other things with Go 113, let's gather them there, and then we can, as people want to do bits of that, they can sign up for them there.
All right, let's continue. I have another actually code generation type thing. I think it would be very interesting to take our existing, like right now we have the typed clients and the dynamic client. And they have different behaviors when they don't understand a field. Like the type clients will drop those and the dynamic clients will preserve it. I think it would be very interesting to generate not the typed client, but a interface that wraps a dynamic client. So you get type safety by calling the methods, and under the hood it uses a dynamic object. I think that might be a very interesting, like you get the aspects of the dynamic client. Yeah, I think it would be interesting.
We already have some of that in controller runtime. It doesn't do the field preservation, but we have a similar interface.
Well, I mean, the field preservation is the critical part of it, right?
That's kind of
Right. I'm saying like we could make use of the interface and figure out the field preservation bit.
As if you made an interface that like you made it alive by plugging in a dynamic what do you call it, an unstructured object, then we get the preservation for free. I don't know, something to think about. It's not super related to that particular code generation item, but okay.
Yeah. Have you thought about moving the code generator completely out of KK? I've thought about that.
Yeah, well, we tried it once already. It is in staging, right?
It is in staging. Are we ready to make the split? That would be another one where you could look at it and say that could be a meaningful distinction and a path.
Yeah, because we already did the split for Django, right? Like that's completely separate now.
Django is never in, but yeah.
Code generator is like the root of our tree. Of all the ones to move out, that one would be the easiest.
Okay, I'm if it can be made to work, I'm in favor.
Right. It's a little more difficult in GoMod, but I will make a note to see what.
Okay. Stefan, do you want to talk about the next item?
Yeah. So the feature of this proposal is OpenAPI v3 support. So having another endpoint. This needs a cap, obviously. We are prototyping that, know more or less what we want. It's pretty obvious. We have the Go OpenAPI dependency, and Go OpenAPI is not well maintained for a long time, but it's really critical for our API semantics of validation and other things which we added. And we think about replacing the validator at least. So probably forking it, simplifying it, and correcting it because it's really wrong in some places. And then we have a second
client-side validator, the kube control validator.
Yeah, the second one is the client-side one. This is not Go OpenAPI. It's our own, but it's incomplete and has issues, we know. We work around server side to not hit those issues in kube control, and we want to replace that with the shared validator probably, which we use instead of Go OpenAPI. So it's a lot of rework, fixing, cleanup under the hood, not much visible, but pretty important for the future of validation.
Yeah, one thing when we do work in this area, I'd like us to just everybody who's working on it be aware of like the stuff we did for apply, because it does some stuff with schemas too, and make sure that we're not duplicating effort. And ideally, like if there's an operation, if we could sort of centralize and make it performed, basically not end up with multiple implementations where it's appropriate. Like sometimes we have an OpenAPI schema, and sometimes we have the apply schema, so it's reasonable to do
Yeah, we have the structural schema now, which is a good base for both of them.
I think the structural schema is very similar to the schema type that we have for server-side apply.
It is.
So I think there's more opportunity for deduplication on the input half of the stack than there is on the output validation half of the stack, if that makes sense. Like we have Q builder, and we have our built-in like we have this very strange path for built-ins where we basically compile an API server to generate a spec, which we then check in, which I think we can probably simplify that path some.
Maybe it's open API gen, yeah.
Okay. Next, I have a few items, one of which I thought of during this, since we started talking. So a concept that's come up a few times and is, I thought of it again based on some things I got pinged on. I'm not sure that this issue is a super great example.
I threw that in there. I wasn't sure if that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, it's kind of an example. Basically, what I'm thinking of is like we know how the generic API, we know how a API object is supposed to behave, a resource from API server, even if we don't necessarily understand very much about the content of the object. Like we know how metadata is supposed to behave. We know how the optimistic locking stuff is supposed to behave. Interpretations and the garbage collector finalizers, all that stuff. We know a bunch of generic stuff about objects, but we don't have any generic tests. So I think it would be good if we had a generic test suite that like you tell it, okay, here's my endpoint, here's my object. You give it one or two examples of valid objects, because we don't necessarily know what a valid example of your resource would be. You give it one or two examples of valid objects, and then it completely generically goes out and tests like, okay, does your post endpoint work? Does your put endpoint work? Does your patch endpoint work? Does your watch endpoint work? Which is what the linked issue is about. Yeah, I think there's a lot of value we could add there. Like that would verify. I think that would be pretty.
We have unit tests around basically all of the REST endpoints. So the unit REST test does a lot of that. Are you wanting to have something like that you can run like against an actual API server instead of as a unit test?
It would be good for a conformance type test. Like if you, with a given API object, there's kind of two sort of orthogonal things you want to test about it. Like one is like, does it uphold its read-write contract? Like, can you write a reasonable client against it? And the other is, does it perform the action that is labeled on the tin? Like, does it do what it's supposed to do? That's like the semantic behavior. That you need to know a lot more detail about it to effectively test, right? Like you can't test a deployment. That's really kind of testing the controller for the object more than it is the resource itself, if that makes sense.
I think I understand the distinction, but I do think that it is valid to create resources that do not conform to the standard CRUD. And in fact, we encourage that today with endpoints like our own subject access review. And I would be careful about labeling those non-conformant versus non.
That's pretty discoverable, though. So I think the resource indicates that it only supports create and doesn't support get. So like the test could say, if you support create and get, this is what the relationship between those should be.
Yeah, we can read the discovery doc or the open API spec or whatever to figure out what verbs it is supposed to support. And if you support a verb, then you should probably do it in the right way. Or get an exception. Like I do think we have some exceptions, like the subject access review or whatever. But
you want to do those knowingly, not accidentally.
I agree with those things. What I don't want to have happen is have a conformance test for an aggregated API server that says, oh, you're not conformant because you have an endpoint that doesn't have watch. And so
I think
it's great.
not
Works
supporting
differently.
watch is pretty common for aggregated API servers, and it shouldn't be like a draconian process to get an exception. And maybe it's just as simple as including a marker or something in your OpenAPI spec that says like, I have a non-standard blah 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 thing. Don't try to run the conformance on me.
That's fine.
Yeah, we need to make provisions for things that are not conformant, but those need to be deliberate and not accidental.
That's fine. I just don't want to see things labeled non-conformant that were never intended to act as standard CRUD.
Maybe non-conformant isn't quite the right word. You're non-conformant if you tried to be an ordinary Kubernetes resource and failed.
Yes, I agree with that.
If you didn't make the attempt, it's not that you're not conformant, it's that you're doing something else.
And there should be one example. Jordan should be painfully familiar with projects. They actually do support get list watch, but the watch semantic isn't quite right. And it has always been documented that way. But I wouldn't want to have, say, an entire API server labeled non-conformant when there's an endpoint that says use this for user viewable things, but not for machine-driven action.
Yeah, I don't know that we would label the entire thing non-conformant if it screws up one particular API. And yeah, I think you should be able to document that or exclude it or something like that.
Okay.
Are we measuring conformance based on the definition for the SIG, the API machinery, or the conformance definition from SIG architecture?
I think this tool would probably start out as something that you can run against your API server and see if you unexpectedly broke a standard contract.
Yeah, this would be like testing for, I don't have a good word for this, Kubernetes resource model. This would be testing that you conform to the standard Kubernetes resource model.
Imagine running this against, say, the service catalog or the OpenShift API server.
One of the things
for our own.
One of the things for the conformance definition for the SIG architecture that everybody needs to conform to is those definitions need to be published in the Kubernetes repo under Swagger JSON. There's a difference between what's available on an API server later versus what's in feature flags or what CRDs they install, and what must be on all clusters as the SIG architecture definition conformance.
Yeah, this is describing a test that we could use to verify that all the APIs built into Kubernetes function as expected. But also a tool that can be run against aggregated or custom resources.
So
not part of
think of this as a conformance test generator, not a conformance test. Does that make sense? This is a thing where you put in an API resource and it gives you a test for that API resource. Okay, it's not a conformance test in and of itself.
Right.
Okay, let's go on. Let's keep going. We've only got 20 minutes left. Field gates. Is it time for field gates yet? And I think the world has changed a lot since we approved a design for basically excluding fields from our specification if they were disabled by a feature gate. Especially in that we've got CRDs now. So I wonder if we should revisit the topic. And it'd be, yeah, so it's not clear that CRDs need this functionality because you can just put in a version of the schema that doesn't have the field. So is it still relevant for built-ins? I don't know. Is everybody following?
I think so, but I think if we were going to invest time, I'd really like to go in the direction of, given a Golang struct and some markers, can we generate the OpenAPI instead of trying to generate the OpenAPI by taking those objects and wiring a REST handler?
Yeah, if I recall the design, which is entirely possible, I don't, but I think that's what in the design is.
Okay.
you would annotate the field in the object and basically label it with the feature gate that enables or disables it. And then all of our tooling would like suppress that in the decoding steps and the spec generation steps. I think that was the basic idea.
Okay. I'd have an interest in seeing it done, but probably not enough to work on it myself.
Yeah, I think that's might be where I'm at too. We'll see. The next thing is, I don't know if it's not really related, but I think it is an important feature that people are going to want pretty soon. Well, that people definitely want today, but it's really hard, which is making CRDs permit you to reference other objects in the schema, right? So like I'm writing some sort of controller, it's got a template, like a pod template or something. I want that template to match the version of pod that is currently installed in this cluster. So instead of like copy pasting the schema for pod, which in addition to being super large and bloating my CRD object, it also could be stale or just not match exactly the pod in the cluster. So it's much more correct if I'm able to somehow declare like this thing is a pod object or a pod template or right, like refer to some other object in the cluster's schema. But this is really hard because it implies like we'd want to like run the standard conversion and validation functions on that subset
Yeah,
of the right?
we had something related now with defaulting object and with the social schema object matter, which comes from the API server. But you might have embedded objects, and it's not clear which schema of object matter you want. The one of the developer at development time or the one at runtime. It's tricky.
I think the answer is that you want the one that is currently installed in the cluster, and when the cluster's idea of metadata changes, so does the one in your object, and that means like you need to like use the storage migrator to read and write everything to update it, right? And you need to use the default semantics of the cluster it's in.
Yeah, the other issue with supporting schema references, object meta is at least fundamental to all objects. So even if you had an API server that was only serving like namespaces and CRDs, you would still have object meta. But what most people want to reference are things like pods and deployments and like big bulky things that only belong to Kube API server, not to some generic API server. Mm-hmm. And so deciding which references we would allow, like, and what happens if you reference like a beta schema and then we deprecate that and stop serving that in, a year. Like what happens to your CRDs that reference this beta schema?
Yeah, I think your CRD has to be updated.
Yeah. So like the idea that you could have an API server that only served custom resources and that was it. And in that server, trying to install a CRD that says, oh, I embed a V1 pod, that server would say, like, I don't know what a V1 pod is. What do you mean?
Yeah, I think in such a server, you would have to install the CRD for pods to get that to resolve. Right?
So we live downstream of Kubernetes for a while now. OpenShift does have APIs that embedded pods. I don't know that I would be net happier just referencing it and hoping it all matched, because there are many cases where all you're doing is plumbing it from A to B. Like, yep, I have this pod template. I'm just moving the fields, and I don't have to interpret what they mean at all. So using the level of the server is fine. There are also cases where, you know what, I have a semantic understanding of some pieces of this pod, and these are the ones that honestly seem to be more useful, right? Like I can understand this. I'm doing a manipulation of this, and when I do that, I'm actually fairly sensitive to the level of the pod that I have. I mean, not catastrophically so, but when init containers come along, that that changes things. When ephemeral containers arrive, that changes what these things can do.
I think to actually make this work, you'd have to like just like we have controllers that control certain aspects of CRDs. I think you'd have to like have a resolution, like a reference resolution controller that goes out and resolves a reference and like puts in a hash or whatever is like the current version of this reference that's stored in this object is this, so that you can detect if your reference changes, which then implies things about all the data stored. Like you just said about you know, schlepping data from one place to another, you don't care, but you kind of do care if the data, if you stored that data in the custom resources, and then the thing that they're actually about changes, like all that data is now wrong.
Yeah, so the experience that we've had downstream is when validation changes, we end up in trouble, right? And that's probably the biggest one, right? Like validation changes, and now are these things valid or not? How are we validating them? Does our validation have to match exactly what Cube's validation is? Is there a way for us to do that? It's possible, but at least in our experience, it hasn't been as easy as just saying, yep, it's this one.
Yeah, okay. I want to talk about this more, but I think we need to keep moving. The last thing that I added here is it maybe time for some latching validation tightening? Like right now, and thanks for mentioning validation. Right now, it's basically impossible to change validation. If you make it tighter, then people can't upgrade because we break currently stored objects and you can't update them anymore. If we make it looser, it seems like that should be safe, but then actually you can no longer roll back, right? Like if you upgrade, make a new object that takes advantage of the looser rules, and then discover a problem and roll back, now you've got the problem with that object. So really any validation changes need to be thought through carefully. There's an issue out there that I didn't bother to link because I added this a few minutes ago. There's an issue out there where Jordan and I have kind of worked out a system for doing some validation tightening, and I think that it may be time to work on this, especially for server-side. Thank you, Jordan. Server-side apply. I think we're going to want to make schema changes that are like probably not significant for users, but are important for the server-side apply machinery and or the stuff that we build out of it, like unions or mutable fields or whatever. And so they'd have like subtle differences, and it would be good to be able to roll that out in a safe way.
We've done ratcheting validation smeared over like 2+ releases in isolated cases. So validation that's aware of the old object and says, if the old object has this data, then don't allow it in the new object as well. Like, but it's not systematic.
Yeah, I think it's not systematic, and also there's a subtle problem with that, which is you may have a system, you may not have objects. The objects might be transient, so it's not good enough to just permit existing objects to retain the old validation semantics. You need to monitor the cluster for new objects that rely on the old validation semantics, because you could have like a batch system that creates a bunch of workloads and like, right?
Yeah, you said that. I don't think I agree entirely. And if you sort of level up to unknowable questions like, is data like this about to show up? I think you have to be able to trigger like the I'm done adding data flag externally, like have something that understands the cluster lifecycle.
Yeah,
tell you when you want to tighten.
That's basically what I think we ended up at. Is like, leave it on the old semantics for like a month or a couple months, and just count how many objects show up that pass the old validation but not the new one. And if you don't see any in like a month or a release or something like that, then latch to the new one where you start warning. You start giving errors, but the administrator can still turn turn it back off if it turns out that it's a process that you run like once a quarter. Right? Like really people writing such processes need to be testing them more frequently than they run them, but we don't live in a perfect world and not everybody thinks of that. Okay, let's keep going. Chow.
Yeah, so the HA storage version API, the CAP is merged. This is for allowing HA API servers to expose what storage version they can read and write. Currently, it's the only user of this API will be the storage migrator. I want to know if the SIG has other interests in this API and how, is there any other use case of this API? Or use it as an example for other HA problems.
Yeah. Yeah, we discussed this on the mailing list, like, I don't know how long ago, in the last like 4 or 5 months. And so I'm pretty happy to see someone act on it. But I haven't actually read the latest, the final version of this. So
it is narrowly focused on gathering information about what storage versions actual servers are using. And then it externally reviews that information to make a decision for the case of storage migration. It is not generically trying to solve exposure of this is what a QAPI server is doing. And it is not trying to inform how a QAPI server stores its data. So today that's hard-coded and it remains hard-coded after this.
I think that's more or less what we agreed on in the email thread is like everybody that has this problem, just make a Kubernetes API object and use our built-in coordination mechanisms to just like, do it the hard way, basically. Okay, I have one more item about the external name CAP.
Yeah, I'm just looking for feedback on the CAP, which I talked about a couple of meetings ago. So if someone is interested into dropping some feedback, it would be great. And yeah.
All right, thanks for bringing it to our attention. This wasn't on my radar. I have been pretty occupied with other things, so I will leave it open in a tab. You may want to reach out on Slack in a few days if you don't get feedback on this.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, feel free to be aggressive.
Respectfully aggressive.
At least with me, I don't know if David would appreciate that.
I'm looking through. If I forget about you, definitely remind me. Especially if I told you I was going to look at it.
Yeah. Everyone should feel free to hound David like 20 hours a day.
I don't know if I have opinions on this one right off. I also had not really looked at it beyond the title.
All right, let's see. The last section is on E2E test conformance coverage measurement. Hippie Hacker, are you on the call? I think you spoke up earlier. Okay, you want to talk about this?
I'll try to go. We're short on time. The SIG architecture has a subgroup called conformance, and it's there to ensure that all the cloud providers can run the CNCF, get the CNCF badge for conformance. And what we're trying to do is ensure that we're moving towards 100% coverage, and how we measure that and ensure that as we introduce new features or new API surface area, that is included in our tests. Eventually, the desire is to move towards something where we can not only have that policy in place, which we do, but we have a way to enforce that. And they're exploring using a PR blocking job or some type of feedback mechanism where we can compare each PR and the results of those tests against that coverage. Now, how we define coverage and how we measure coverage and how we tie those together are evolving. But the primary mechanism right now is endpoints or API operations that comes from the Swagger JSON. we're having it takes some time, like 30 minutes on a 56-core machine to match together the blue and the orange. And we're trying to find a way that doesn't impact everybody, that we can run on our on the CI jobs. And there's been some mention on the conformance group around maybe adding an alpha feature gate that we're not terribly interested in moving forward because we just want to have that information available to process. And then another one is, in order for us to know what we don't need to test, we were testing some endpoints that that were not used by anyone. That's why they weren't tested, and we found they needed to be deprecated. And we found some fields that were alpha, and we learned about that there is description, but there's not a field for us to declaratively say, don't worry about that field that's alpha, or that there's a gate required, or that it's deprecated. So we added that. And I thought it might be useful if it was programmatically available for us to not even attempt to worry about those fields for coverage. And this is kind of an ongoing discussion, but I just wanted to feedback that it would be useful to have some help in prioritizing and making sure that what's the best form for this? This may not be it.
We don't have too much time left, so maybe I'll just do a brain here, unless you've got something to say, David.
I do. I think that this SIG views its role as providing the machinery for people to write APIs, but we aren't responsible for the content or the test coverage of those particular APIs.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure what you would really want us to be doing here.
Yeah. Let me speak to like the second of these two bullet points, the mapping an audit event to its operation. I described a method in the, like you opened an issue about this, and I described a method that you can do this. I don't understand why it is hard. It should not be taking 30 minutes on 56-core machine. It should be taking like microseconds per item, because like there's code out, like API server does this, and the path is in the Swagger, and the path is in the audit event. So I'm not sure why that's hard. So and even if it is hard, it's not clear that it will pass our bar, because you have a very specialized need for this. I don't think it will help the average user. The feature gate, the feature gate stuff, like I think we really should be omitting fields from our spec if they're not in use.
Should we move this last item? Looks like there is more conversation.
Yeah, maybe we should move this to the next meeting. Yeah. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you, everybody. We'll follow up on this next meeting or over.
Bye, guys.
Right.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Fede.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Congratulations or commiserations?
Yeah, I know.
What is that?